West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
What if somebody could target your mobile phone without you having to click on a link or open an attachment or even answer a call? What if just by having your phone number, someone who wished you harm could take complete control of your phone from afar? Again, without you doing anything wrong and without you knowing that they had control of it. They could see all of your contacts. They could read all of your texts. They could read all of your emails. They could see all of your photos and videos. They could see everything in your calendar. They could listen in on all of your calls. Without you knowing, they could use the location data in your phone to pinpoint your exact personal location at any time, 24 hours a day. They could turn on the microphone in your phone to listen in wherever you are. They could turn on the camera on your phone to see you and see whatever you're doing, again, without you ever knowing that they were doing it. And again, without you doing anything wrong to make it possible. It turns out that kind of technology exists, where somebody, without you knowing, can access your phone and do all of those things on your phone and see everything that you do on your phone and have done on your phone. That technology exists. Imagine how dangerous a tool that would be against civil rights activists. Imagine how dangerous a tool that would have been against the Martin Luther King era civil rights movement. And in fact, this technology, it not only exists, it's not like a concept car. It's not like something that hasn't been deployed. It's just been developed in a lab. It actually has been used already by repressive governments around the world to target exactly who you think they would target with a tool like that. This thing is marketed supposedly as a law enforcement tool, an anti-terrorism tool. But government officials have used it around the world against their personal enemies, their ex-wives, their political rivals. And of course, they've used it against opposition figures and journalists and human rights advocates and civil rights activists and advocates for minority groups. Whoever it is that's that country's thorn in the side, whoever it is that's that country's insistent moral beacon, right? Whoever's making change and leading movements, whoever's angering repressive government officials, that's who's been targeted with this technology. There's a book that's coming out tomorrow, which means technically it comes out at midnight tonight. And the book is called Pegasus. It's written by two journalists, Laurent Richard and Sandrine Rigaud. They exposed the existence of this technology and its use by repressive governments around the world. The big break in them exposing it came when they got a list of 50,000 phones that had been selected for targeting with this pernicious software. The software is called Pegasus. With that list of 50,000 numbers in hand, these journalists launched an international reporting project to discover what this software was, where it came from, and who it was being used against. And as I said, the book, which is called Pegasus, it comes out at midnight tonight. I wrote the introduction to the book. Here's a little piece of it from the audiobook. The insidious power of a Pegasus infection was that it was completely invisible to the victim. You'd have no way to know the baddies were reading your texts and emails and listening in on your calls and even your in-person meetings until they used their ability to track your exact location to send the men with guns to meet you. For the Pegasus project to succeed in exposing the scale of the scandal, the journalists knew they would need to be able to diagnose an infection or an attempted infection on an individual phone. Claudio and Donka figured out how to do it. Working quite literally alone, these two took on a multi-billion-dollar corporation that employed 550 well-paid cyber specialists, many with the highest levels of military cyber warfare training. To best that Goliath, these two Davids had to fashion their own slingshot. They had to invent the methods and tools of their forensics on the fly. That they succeeded in that is as improbable as it is important for all of our sakes. Here also is the story of the victims of Pegasus. Among them are those who hold enough power that you might expect they'd be protected from this kind of totalist intrusion. Heads of state, high-ranking royals, senior politicians, law enforcement figures. And then there's the people whom governments the world over have always liked to put in the crosshairs. Opposition figures, dissidents, human rights activists, academics. Laurent and Sandrine rack focus tight on the group most represented in the leaked data, of course, and that's journalists. It's no surprise that Pegasus has been turned full blast on reporters and editors in order to harass, intimidate, and silence. If this anti-democratic authoritarian nightmare cannot be safely reported upon, it won't be understood. And if it isn't understood, there's no chance that it will be stopped. Again, that's from the introduction I did to this book, Pegasus, which comes out tonight at midnight. I did not write the whole book. I just did the introduction because I think the story is incredible. And this story has developed in the United States in really interesting ways. Once Laurent and Sandrine and this international reporting project exposed that this kind of surveillance was happening, the U.S. government did an unexpectedly stand-up and strong thing. They blacklisted the company that makes Pegasus, and they banned the use of Pegasus software in the United States. That didn't stop it around the world. This is still a live issue, and it's actually still a live issue in the United States. Just last week, the U.S. Supreme Court let the company WhatsApp go ahead and sue the company that makes Pegasus. WhatsApp gets to sue Pegasus, gets to sue the company that makes Pegasus for using their software to break into people's phones and spy on people's encrypted messages on WhatsApp. So that sort of intra-tech civil lawsuit is going to go ahead, and that could be a big deal. This is a live issue. This is hotly contested territory.
It is Tuesday, the 17th of January of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, a small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world. Well, how are you? Had a little bit of a gap there, did we not? I intended to keep getting podcasts done, but there was a lot to do in terms of, we were unable to get new content into the broadcaster. And doing a live show was not possible here because the old machine was degrading terribly quick. I was able to pull in David's feed and the national feeds, but it was a little tough getting live around here. Our auxiliary ones worked, but and then of course Dropbox was not being supported by the old machine anymore. or Dropbox wasn't supporting the old machine, so I was not able to sync up and send over to that Dropbox to get it into the, I know this is inside baseball, but to get it inside the broadcaster or onto the broadcaster. So we were stuck until we could get the new MacBook Pro delivered, which it came in the amount of time it said it would. I could have chose something that came a couple of days sooner, but it still wouldn't have mattered, and it wouldn't have given us what we wanted. I would have been choosing a machine of lesser quality and ability only for the time of its delivery. So we went ahead and got this one, and there's a bit of a learning curve working our way around it. Some things haven't quite figured out. But I will. And one of those issues was, for some reason, when we go back to a feed, when we've been running a feed and go back to it on an event, it doesn't pick it right up. So that's a little bit of a concern, and we'll have to keep track of that, and we will. So a little bit of manual, just a little bit of manual manipulation to be able to do it. So, all right, just doing a couple of things with my offhand to keep the broadcaster in eyesight so that if anything happens, we can attend to it quickly. Well, so I suppose we have a lot of news out there. Joe stole some documents, apparently, if you listen to the media. Why does he have them? It's Hillary's emails all over again, and you know it. We knew it when the story first came out, and it's even more clear now. The media, you know who I mean, the cool kids of the media, just cannot seem to break their old habits. Boy, oh boy. And one of those, I guess, is proving to the world that they don't have a liberal bias, as if they've never proved it before. Jeez. All right. If somebody spilled some milk, we're just going to have to, I don't know, line them up against the wall, steal a milk truck, drive it into the wall, and then sue the manager of the business that called in the accident. That's just Trump being Trump. Okay. All right. Stole nuclear secrets, wouldn't give them back, said they were his. Come and try to take them, so they get a search warrant and they come and try to take them, and it's the worst thing in the world. And now you have the Nazis in charge. And I'm not being hyperbolic when I'm calling the Freedom Caucus. That's what they call themselves. They're Nazis. I got in a lot of trouble when the Freedom Caucus was just the Tea Party. And I said, they look like Nazis to me. How can you say that? They're wearing the tri-corner hat. That's not Nazis. Yeah, well, you bring guns onto the National Mall, you're a Nazi. I am sorry. Okay, so, and the Nazis don't have very many numbers to stay in charge, but they sure are acting like they have a mandate, don't they? So much so, they've decided to, decades of no smoking around here? Get rid of that, that's woke. Anti-smoking is woke. So now you can smoke in the Capitol again. And not just like, a smelly little clove cigarette. No, they're going to go for the big old cigars. Now, I don't know if they get to actually smoke in the on the floor or in the Senate chamber. I think maybe they're only going to do it in their own offices. Maybe the cafeteria too. Everybody loved to smoke when they ate. I hated it myself because I've never smoked, and the idea of smoking around food it didn't compute. Like smoking pot and food. Yes, pot's supposed to make you hungry, so you're supposed to have food. No one smokes at the table when they're smoking pot, when they're eating their falafel. They just don't. At least not around here. So, the cool kids are saying that the bullies are in charge, and that's just the way they like it. Yeah, they do. And then the only question is, do we allow them to get away with it? Well, they're getting away with it so far, aren't they? Speaking of getting away with things, why don't we get away from this discombobulated opening here? This time off, and one loses their step. What the heck? Anyway, we'll fill you in on personal news and all that stuff as we get on through the week. But right now, why don't we go ahead and give you a rundown on what we have in store for you here in this salon that we call West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Well, of course, that was Rachel at the top from last night about that new book that shows how those two journalists expose the frighteningly invasive Pegasus spyware. And on the rest of the menu, here as we begin in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Ohio's restrictive new election law is angering active duty members of the military and their families because of its potential to disenfranchise them. New Mexico's top prosecutor wants to focus on child civil rights, and Elon Musk's trial on Tesla stock manipulation begins today in San Francisco. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where the trial of a journalist for a prominent Polish newspaper began in Belarus yesterday, Monday, and Italy's most wanted Mafia boss has been nabbed after 30 years on the run. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln, and we thank Kelly for doing so. To the left of that chat room link, across the page, and then just down a little bit from that chat room link at our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon page. And now more than ever, we could use your help. If you could afford to become an recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio and buy us a cup of coffee once a month, maybe an espresso type coffee drink of your choosing. And if you could send those funds our way once a month, thus becoming a recurring Patreon, that really helps us pay our bills and, offset what was spent on this new high-powered machinery to keep Netroots Radio up and resisting, as we have been, over 11 years, almost over 11 years now. Is it going to be 11? It's going to be I think it's only going to be 11. I got to look. Anyway, we've been on for quite a while, more than a decade. And we have you to thank for allowing us to fulfill our civic duty in all that time, and as the founders originally intended. So thank you for your generosity. We'll get back in the swing of things before you know it. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do so, but you can also follow us on Mastodon. And, of course, I don't have that Addy right in front of me. Can I remember it? I think it's at netrootsradio.mstdn+. So somewhere around there, we'll get it up and running for you. That's right. So you can also follow us on Twitter at Netroots Radio and on Mastodon at Netroots Radio MSTDN+. You can follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and you can follow me on Twitter, and I'll get on Mastodon before you know it. You follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Coz 10 minutes before showtime, and to get that linked up on the social media platforms. And I guess I'm going to have to do it on Mastodon as soon as I get over there. And I will, because this guy Elon, oh boy. All right. Let's see, what else? Follow the show on Twitter, Cookbook West, and Pick Up Podcasts. That's what it is. Pick Up Podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever fine podcasts can be found mixed in with all the rest of us, because we're all there. Alrighty. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy's Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays is by Julie Carr Smythe and Gary Fields from the Associated Press. Ohio's restrictive new election law significantly shortens the window for mailed ballots to be received, despite no evidence that the extended timeline has led to fraud or any other problems. And that change is angering active duty members of the military and their families because of its potential to disenfranchise them. The pace of ballot counting after Election Day has become a target of conservatives, egged on by Trump, who knows nothing about how elections are run, or any of his followers. This is how it's always been. It's new to them, though, isn't it? He has promoted a false narrative since losing the 2020 election that fluctuating results as late arriving mail-in ballots are tallied is a sign of fraud. Republican lawmakers said during debate on the Ohio legislation that even if Trump's claims are not true, the skepticism they have caused among conservatives about the accuracy of election results justifies imposing new limits. See how that works? The new law reduces the number of days for county election boards to include mail ballots in their tallies from 10 after Election Day, and that's 10 days after Election Day, to 4. Try to get some mail in 4 days. I'm just saying. Critics say that could lead more ballots from Ohio's military voters to miss the deadline and get tossed. And that issue is not confined to just Ohio. 3 other states narrowed their post-election window for accepting mail ballots last session. According to data from the nonpartisan Voting Rights Lab, similar moves pushed by Republican lawmakers are being proposed or discussed this year in Wisconsin, New Jersey, California, and other states. Ohio's tightened window for receiving mailed ballots is likely to affect just several hundred of the thousands of military and overseas ballots received in any election, and critics say any number is too great. What kind of society do we call ourselves if we are disenfranchising people from their rights that they are over there protecting? And that was Willis Gordon, a Navy veteran and Veteran Affairs Chair of the Ohio NAACP's Executive Committee. Republican State Senator Teresa Gavaroni, who championed the tightened ballot deadline, said Ohio's previous window was an extreme outlier nationally. She said Ohio military and overseas voters still have ample time under the new law. 4 days from overseas? Are you kidding me? While there's certainly more work to do, this new law drastically enhances Ohio's election security and improves the integrity of our elections, which my constituents and citizens across the state have demanded. Nobody has demanded it but a bunch of ignorant people who know nothing about how our elections work, in this reporter's opinion. Republicans claim that Ohio needs to clamp down in the name of election integrity, run counter to GOP officials' glowing assessment of the state's current system. Ohio reported a near-perfect tally of its 2020 presidential election results, for example, and fraud referrals represent a tiny fraction of the ballots cast. Board of Elections data show that in the state's most populous county, which includes the capital city of Columbus, 242 absentee ballots from military and overseas voters were received after Election Day last November. Of that, Nearly 40% arrived more than 4 days later and would have been rejected had the new law been in effect, and that's exactly what they're trying to do. In 2020, a federal survey administered by the U.S. Election Assistance Commission found that Ohio rejected just 1% of the 21,600 ballots cast by overseas and military voters with the 10-day time frame in place. That compared with 2.1% nationally, a figure attributed mostly to voters missing the state ballot deadlines. And they looked at that number and said, every little bit helps. Former state representative Connie Pillich, a Air Force veteran who leads the Ohio Democratic Party's outreach to veterans and military families, rejects the arguments that the relatively small number of affected ballots is worth the trade-off. These guys and gals stationed overseas, living in the sandbox or wherever they are, doing their jobs, putting themselves in harm's way, you are making it harder for them to participate? I can tell you, everyone I've talked to is livid and upset, she said. Those familiar with submitting military ballots said applying for, receiving, and filling out a mailed ballot requires extra time for those who are deployed. Postal schedules, sudden calls to duty, even extra time needed to consult family back home about the candidates and issues are factors. Ohio's new law also sets a new deadline, 5 days earlier, for voters to request a mailed ballot, a move supporters say will help voters meet the tightened return deadline. Neither the Ohio Association of Election Officials nor the state's election chief, Republican Secretary of State Frank LaRose, asked lawmakers to shrink the existing 10-day window for receiving mailed ballots. Aaron Okerman, a lobbyist for the election officials group, said the 7-day post-election window called for in an earlier version of the legislation was a compromise that county election directors decided they could live with. Research by the Voting Rights Lab shows Ohio joined 3 other states, Republican-controlled Arkansas and Iowa and Nevada, where Democrats held full control at the time, in passing laws last year that shortened the post-election return window for mail ballots. 5 states lengthened theirs. Nationwide, a little more than 911,000 military and overseas ballots were cast in 2020. Of those, about 19,000, or roughly 2%, were rejected, typically for being received after the deadline. The Secure Families Initiative, a national nonpartisan group advocating for military voters and their families, is trying to push state election laws in the other direction, toward broader electronic access to voting for service members and their families. Kate Marsh-Lord, the group's communications director, said they were deeply disappointed to see DeWine sign the Ohio bill. In fact, I'm an Ohio voter, born and raised in Columbus, and I've cast my Ohio ballot from as far away as Japan, she said. HB 458 set out to solve a problem that did not exist, and military voters will pay the price for having their ballots disqualified. Marsh-Lord, currently in South Carolina, where her husband is stationed in the Air Force, said mail sometimes took weeks to reach her family when they lived in Japan. Even if I were to get my ballot in the mail a week ahead of time, a lot of times with the military postal service and the postal service in general, there are delays, she said. So that shortened window does not allow as much time for things that are really out of military voters' control. She said it's even more challenging for active duty personnel deployed to remote areas, the people on the front lines of the fight to defend our democracy and our freedom and the right to vote around the world. Those are the people who will be most impacted by this change. Susan Montoya Bryan of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. New Mexico's top prosecutor wants to start a conversation with lawmakers and the governor in hopes of charting a new course for a state beleaguered by violent crime, poor educational outcomes, and persistently dismal child welfare rankings. Attorney General Raul Torres, who took office on the 1st of January after serving as the district attorney in New Mexico's busiest judicial district, wants to focus on the civil rights of children by providing them with legal representation. The Democrat says New Mexico is off the charts when it comes to abuse and neglect, and creating a special unit within the Attorney General's office could help turn the tide when it comes to combating adverse childhood experiences that often result in youth ending up in the criminal justice system. Torres outlined priorities for his administration and the legislative session that begins today in a recent interview with the Associated Press. While acknowledging the suite of public safety, bail reform, and gun control bills to be introduced by lawmakers, he said he wants more of the focus to be on the role that child well-being plays in the state's problems. Torres worked on one of the highest-profile child abuse cases while in private practice and was often asked as district attorney about the source of Albuquerque's crime and public safety problems. He said there's a lot of talk about drugs and guns, but he believes it comes back to what happens when children end up in dangerous and destabilized homes or don't get the help they need in the classrooms. The people that we're trying to detain today are usually kids that have been failed by the system 15 or 20 years before. That's where they end up, he said. And so what I'm trying to do now is move the lens and move my focus not away from public safety, but further upstream to see if there's a way for us to prevent people from coming into contact with the criminal justice system in the first place. Advocates who have been pushing for years for child welfare reforms in New Mexico are excited about the prospects. Some describe it as a public health crisis, pointing to scientific research that shows abuse, neglect, and other adverse experiences have been known to result in negative outcomes later in life. New Mexico would join California and other states that have special offices focused on children's rights or independent oversight panels that monitor child welfare agencies. Lidke of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. While still grappling with the fallout from a company he did take private, beleaguered billionaire Elon Musk is now facing a trial over a company he didn't. Long before Musk purchased Twitter for $44 billion in October, he had set his sights on Tesla, the electric automaker where he continues to serve as CEO and from which he derives most of his wealth and fame. Musk claimed in August 7, 2018 tweet that he had lined up the financing to pay for a $72 billion buyout of Tesla, which he then amplified with a follow-up statement that made the deal seem imminent. But The buyout never materialized, and now Musk will have to explain his actions under oath in a federal court in San Francisco. The trial, which begins today with jury selection, was triggered by a class action lawsuit on behalf of investors who own Tesla stock for a 10-day period in August of 2018. Musk's tweets back then fueled a rally of Tesla stock prices that abruptly ended a week later after it became apparent that he didn't have the funding for a buyout after all. That resulted in him scrapping his plan to take the automaker private, culminating in a $40 million settlement with U.S. securities regulators that also required him to step down as the company's chairman. Musk has since contended he entered that settlement under duress and maintained he believed he had locked up financial backing for a Tesla buyout during meetings with representatives from Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund. The trial's outcome may hinge on the jury's interpretation of Musk's motives for tweets the U.S. District Judge Edward Chen has already decided were a falsehood. Chen dealt Musk another setback on Friday when he rejected Musk's bid to transfer the trial to a federal court in Texas, where Tesla moved its headquarters in 2021. Musk has argued that negative coverage of his Twitter purchase had poisoned the jury pool in the San Francisco Bay Area. I wouldn't say it just poisoned him there, Elon. Musk's leadership of Twitter, where he gutted the staff and alienated users and advertisers, has proven unpopular among Tesla's current stockholders, who are worried he has been devoting less time steering the automaker at a time of intensifying competition. Those concerns contributed to a 65% decline in Tesla's stock last year that wiped out more than $700 billion in shareholder wealth, far more than the $14 billion swing in fortune that occurred between the company's high and low stock prices during the August 7 to 17, 2018 period covered in the class action lawsuit. The lawsuit is based on the premise that Tesla shares wouldn't have traded at such a wide range if Musk had not dangled the prospect of buying the company for $420 per share. Tesla's stock has split twice since then, making that $420 price worth about $20 on an adjusted basis now. The shares closed last week at $122.40, down from its November 2021 split adjusted peak of $414.50. After Musk dropped the idea of a Tesla buyout, the company overcame a production problem, resulting in a rapid upturn in car sales that caused its stock to soar and minted Musk as the world's richest person until he bought Twitter. Musk dropped from the top spot on the wealth list after the stock market's backlash to his handling of Twitter. The trial is likely to provide insights into Musk's management style, given the witness list includes some of Tesla's current and former top executives and board members, including luminaries such as Larry Ellison, Oracle co-founder, as well as James Murdoch, the son of media mogul Rupert. The drama may also shed light on Musk's relationship with his brother, Kimball, who is also on the list of potential witnesses who may be called during the trial scheduled to continue through the 1st of February. Well. That brings us to our break. And why don't we do that? And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, a whole lot of nothing. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon were one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Watching the film Babylon, it's another wonder that anyone ever greenlit this project and let an amazing cast of A-list talent go to waste. Directed by Damien Chazelle of La La Land fame, Babylon tells the tale of the debauchery of early Hollywood, namely the 1920s before the days of censorship and decency codes, and right around the time that movies were transitioning from silent into sound. It's based loosely on 3 actual film people during that time, particularly Nellie, an it girl actress, Manny, an up-and-coming studio executive, and Jack, the hard-drinking, silent film idol who is finding the transition to talkies to be a bit harder than he envisioned. At just over 3 hours, Babylon is a sort of dark version of the beloved classic Singing in the Rain, only with lots of nudity, naughty behavior, and a defecating elephant, really, in the opening set piece, just to prepare you for what's coming. One problem here is that the movie tries to be a little bit of everything, including a walk down Hollywood's memory lane where so many Oscars have been mined. Ultimately, though, no Oscars here. This one's bloated, sensationalized, and at times even a bit dull due to its length versus actual content. If there's a bright spot here, it would be the outstanding performance of Margot Robbie as Nellie. In the end, though, it's hard to care about the fates of any of these characters because they are never really fleshed out beyond caricatures in the script. Sadly, unlike the Hanging Gardens it shares its name with, this Babylon is likely to be forgotten even by those who see it. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and beat us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Karen Hopkin. Ever notice that some music just really makes you want to dance? Well, a new study shows that it is, indeed, all about the bass. Because researchers have found that during a concert, boosting the bass bumps up the boogieing. The results appear in the journal Current Biology.
Music and musical rhythm have been kind of fascinating to me for a long time, since I was a kid. And in particular, the way that they make us feel.
Daniel Cameron is a postdoctoral fellow at McMaster University. He also plays drums.
As a drummer, you're interested in making the crowd want to move and feel good and give a good, pleasurable time feel. And this is related to the work I do in science.
Cameron and his colleagues want to understand how music can engender an almost irrepressible urge to feel our bodies in motion.
And we knew from anecdotal evidence and other experimental evidence that there was an association between bass and dancing.
So people who enjoy electronic dance music, or EDM, report that the thrumming bass produces a sensation that makes them want to move. And some studies have shown that our movements are more fine-tuned when we're locked onto bass notes.
So for example, if you have people tap along to a sequence of tones, their tapping is slightly more accurate. They're more synchronized when those tones are low in frequency compared to high in frequency.
So the researchers set out to determine,
if you add more bass to music, will it cause more dancing?
Now, they didn't want to manipulate the bass line in a way that was obvious, because then people might consciously decide to step up their stepping out.
That might be interesting.
But it would also muddy the results, like if someone in a drug trial knows they're getting the real deal and not a placebo.
So we wanted to do a subtle manipulation, a very consciously undetectable manipulation.
So they broke out a set of very, very low-frequency speakers.
These are specialized speakers, kind of like subwoofers. People might have subwoofers as part of their stereo system, and these are speakers that play even lower frequencies than most systems are able to do. Even lower frequencies than we think are typically able to be heard.
With their special speakers set up, the researchers staged a concert.
We had the electronic music duo Orphix come to our live lab.
That's live, L-I-V-E, for Large Interactive Virtual Environment. It's like a cross between a performance space and a laboratory.
The people who came to the show were fans of the group. They wanted to come and see EDM. They wanted to dance. And while they were there, we asked if they wanted to volunteer in our experiment, and a good number of people signed up.
Recruits adorned themselves with headbands bearing motion capture reflectors, which the researchers used to track their movements.
And then what we did was just, during the concert, turn these very low-frequency speakers on and leave them on for 2.5 minutes, turn them off, leave them off for 2.5 minutes, back on for 2.5 minutes, off for 2.5 minutes, on, off, throughout the concert.
Now, you can't hear when the speakers are switched on. And based on the surveys filled out after the show, and a follow-up study of the manipulated audio clips, neither could the concert-goers. But their feet sure knew something was up.
And what we found was, by looking at the motion capture data, people just moved more. They covered more ground, they moved faster when the low-frequency speakers were on. So this tells us that the extra bass, these very, very low frequencies, cause more moving.
About 12% more moving and grooving. So the concert and the experiment were a success. And best of all,
people enjoyed the concert, and the more people moved, the more they enjoyed the concert.
Which shouldn't be a surprise.
Dancing and pleasure really go hand in hand together. It's something we like to do with music. It's a pleasurable response, and we show with this work that bass is part of that mix.
Next up, Cameron says he'd like to look at whether bass can help bring us together.
So people are more likely to feel good about one another and help one another if they've had some experience synchronizing their movements together. And dance is a great, fun way to do this. And this might be related to why we find dance in all cultures and throughout history for the human species. It's a fundamental part of being human.
So, to cut down on conflict, maybe just crank up the bass and cut up the dance floor. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Karen Hopkins.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Are democracy and liberty in conflict? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. A former head of the ACLU, Ira Glasser, who retired in 2001, in a recent letter to the New York Times argued that the answer to that question is yes. Our constitutional system, Glasser wrote, is based on two principles, democracy and liberty. Democracy is the principle that the majority gets to decide. Liberty is the principle that the majority doesn't get to decide everything. He explained, again quoting, just because there are more white than black people, or more Christians than Jews or Muslims, or more Democrats and Republicans than socialists, doesn't mean that white people can deny black people the right to vote, that Christians by majority vote can impose their religious beliefs on Jews and Muslims, or that minority political views can be suppressed. The Bill of Rights protects minorities of all kinds by intentionally placing legal limits on the power of majorities. Those limitations on majority rule, set forth in both the federal and state constitutions, are what we call rights. Rights are freedoms that, in theory anyway, can't be taken away. Freedoms that remain inviolate, in perpetuity. For protection of those rights, we rely on majorities respecting the limitations on their power. And when majorities or their representatives fail to do so, then we depend on the courts. That's how the system is designed to work. And sometimes it has. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1915. It was the day that the people of Chicago stood up to demand an end to hunger and unemployment. Their stand began at a meeting at Bowen Hall, part of the Hull House complex founded by Nobel Prize winner Jane Addams. The number of unemployed had grown across the country due to an economic recession. A harsh winter had made the situation even more desperate in Chicago for thousands of out-of-work and homeless people. 900 people crowded into the hall for the meeting of the League of the Unemployed. More stood outside, straining to hear the speeches. One of the speakers was the fiery Lucy Parsons, the wife of one of the Haymarket martyrs. At the front of the hall hung a black banner emblazoned with one word in white letters: hunger. Those attending the meeting decided to march to City Hall to express their demand for work. Some in the crowd carried banners. One read, "Why starve in the midst of plenty?" Another demanded, "Give us this day our daily bread." This banner was fittingly carried by Episcopal priest John Tucker, known affectionately as Friar Tuck. 1,500 people marched that day, and with them they had a new anthem to sing as they marched. For the first time, Ralph Chaplin introduced his song, the labor anthem, Solidarity Forever. As the march made its way downtown, it was met by the Chicago police. Brandishing batons, the police dispersed the marchers. More than 20 were arrested, including Lucy Parsons and Friar Tuck. Now, more than a century later, Solidarity Forever is still sung when working people gather to stand up united.
Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever.
Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 36 degrees Fahrenheit, and we are expected to be much cooler than even yesterday. Mostly cloudy, though we are under quite foggy conditions at the moment, but we will become cloudy this afternoon. Highs in the mid-40s, maybe cooler. Cloudy skies overnight, with areas of fog developing after midnight and lows near 30. Winds light and variable. Then rain likely tomorrow, which we had plenty of last week. Yes, in the time that we were off, we had a bit of wind damage here at the mothership area. It's a bit of a parkland type landscaping, and things got blown about. And of course, my arthritic knees were flaring up at the same time, so it was no fun. But we look for potential heavy rainfall tomorrow with highs only 38 degrees Fahrenheit, winds out of the west-southwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour, and it looks like it's going to bring with it about a half an inch of rain. Pollen is still rated as none outside the window here in Rogue River itself, which is good. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 29 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is in the low range at level 2. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.08 inches. Visibility is down to 4 miles, and relative humidity is at 94%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 33 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 38 degrees with showers in the vicinity. Rome is 58 and mostly cloudy. Kyiv is 41 and cloudy. Kabul is 17 degrees and partly cloudy. Hong Kong is 54 and fair. Tokyo is 40 degrees and cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 70 degrees and fair. San Francisco, California is 42 degrees and sunny, and New York, New York is 43 degrees Fahrenheit and partly cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Associated Press staff brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Belarus yesterday, Monday, opened the trial of a journalist and prominent member of the country's sizable Polish minority, the latest in a series of court cases against critics of the authoritarian regime of President Alexander Lukashenko. Andres Prosecutor, age 49, faces up to 12 years in prison if convicted of the charges of harming national security and inciting discord. Prosecutor, a journalist for the influential Polish newspaper Gazeta Wyborcza and a top figure in the Union of Poles in Belarus, has been behind bars since his detention in March of 2021. He widely covered major protests that gripped Belarus for weeks in 2020, following a presidential election that gave Lukashenko, in power since 1994, a new term in office, but that was widely regarded by the opposition and Western countries as fraudulent. The trial in the western city of Grodno was closed to independent journalists and Western diplomats, but photos from the courtroom suggested that Prosecutor has lost significant weight while in custody. In Poland, a spokesman for the government, Piotr Mueller, said that despite numerous diplomatic efforts, unfortunately we have no additional tools that could help in this area of political freedom in Belarus. He said it was a scandalous mission. Mueller told a news conference in Warsaw that Poland will continue diplomatic efforts to change the situation. The 2020 protests in Belarus were the largest and most sustained in the country. Authorities responded to the demonstrations with a crackdown that saw more than 35,000 people arrested, thousands beaten by police, and dozens of media outlets and non-governmental organizations shut. About 300,000 of Belarus's 10 million people are ethnic Poles. The Union of Poles came under government pressure after authorities accused Poland of trying to foment an uprising against Lukashenko.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Francis D'Amelio of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Italy's #1 fugitive, a mafia boss convicted of helping to mastermind some of the nation's most heinous slayings, was arrested yesterday, Monday, when he sought treatment at a private clinic in Sicily after 3 decades on the run. Matteo Messina Denaro was tried in absentia and convicted of dozens of murders, including helping to mastermind, along with other Cosa Nostra bosses, a pair of 1992 bombings that killed top anti-mafia prosecutors and led the Italian state to stiffen its crackdown on the Sicilian crime syndicate. He faces multiple life sentences that he is expected to serve in a maximum security prison and under the particularly restrictive conditions reserved for top organized crime bosses. He went into hiding a year after those bombings while still a young man, but he was still considered one of Cosa Nostra's top bosses even as a fugitive. Hundreds of police officers were tasked over the years with tracking him, the last of the 3 longtime top-level Mafia bosses who managed to elude capture for decades. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will be meeting up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.